said it'd been home run 1904.
He told me 10, so I'm sticking to 10. My father. I'm prepared to be disappointed. That's what I was prepared.
Good afternoon. It is a great day to be a Kiwanian. Kids need Kiwanis, and we need you. So thank you for coming. It's good to see everyone. And we will begin our meeting today with our defining statement on the board. Kiwanis is a global organization of volunteers dedicated to improve the world, one child and one community at a time. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clay will lead us in song today.
I had a real debate about the song today. I'm thinking about Halloween. I just started out thinking, well, maybe we'll sing Yankee Doodle, but that's too scary. Then I thought, Dixie, it's been banned. Then I thought there's one that has suspense, scary explosions, and a reward. And that song is called The Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Okay. Thank you. And Alice Garland is online today, and she will share our invocation. So Alice, we're testing out technology. It's the first time we've been able to hear from Zoom.
Well, if it fails, it's my fault. So if you will join me in prayer. Lord, give us open minds, a clear understanding, and a steady purpose to make the most of our talents and lead us into the fields of work where we can best serve. Keep us always mindful of the needs of others and keep us always attuned to our calling in Kiwanis, improving the world one child and one community at a time. Bless this food and bless this club. Amen.
Thank you, Alice. Bob, will you begin with our introducing our guest today?
Good afternoon, fellow Kiwanians. Was that not a heck of a pancake breakfast, wasn't it? Woo! I'm excited to have the family of Clyde McDowell with us today. First, I have Helen Ross, which is his daughter, and her husband, Bob Ross. Then I have Brian McDowell, Megan McDowell, and their lovely children, Avery, Mr. Harrison, and then I have with us also Andrew McDowell, Clyde's grandson, and then I have Barbara McDowell, his daughter-in-law. So hopefully you guys will stop and say hello to them before they leave today.
Cricket. I think we have online, we have Pete, Susie. So
Or on
wave
Zoom.
to Pete and Susie online. Nick, do you have a guest?
Yes, I have several, as a matter of fact. Lucy, if you stand up. This is Judge Lucy Inman. She's a candidate for the North Carolina Supreme Court. And she's visiting with us today. She's got to be in Chapel Hill at 2:30, but hopefully she'll be able to stay around a minute or two at the end of the meeting. And then I also have Jonathan Melton. Sorry, can't read my own writing. Jonathan Melton, incumbent candidate for the at-large seat on the City Council, and David Knight, who's the candidate for the City Council re-election for District E, which covers this area. So, and they both indicated they'll stick around after the meeting when you want to talk to them about what's the matter with the street paving on your street. What do you think of the zoning, or if you just want to tell them thanks for all that the police department did in that recent shooting mess. So they'll be around. We're glad to have them. Thanks.
Hi there, and I have a guest, Jacqueline Wittenberg from the DW Foundation. So we are glad to have us. She came to the pancake breakfast, and she's going to make a quick announcement during the announcements. We'll be right back to that. Thank you. Welcome. 1 second. We'll be right there. Before we get to the announcements, we are so happy to have all the guests. Thank you for coming with us today. Please come back. We'd love you to join our Kiwanis family and be a part of our community. And I want to talk about Saturday, the pancake breakfast. It was a huge success. It was the first time in 3 years we were back together, and didn't it feel good? Yes, thank you. And I want to thank everyone that participated and who came out, who sold tickets, who bought tickets, who called for sponsorships. Thank you. The preliminary numbers are looking good. So, but we are running close to our goal. If everyone would please consider to purchase your tickets if you did not, because this fundraiser is the one event during the year that completely supports our service projects and our school programs. And I want to thank Rick for leading the pancake breakfast, and I want to recognize all the leads who stepped up and did so much on Saturday. Rocky, Gwen, Courtney, Cricket, Bill Whitley, Drew, Nick, and June. And I want to say thank you for taking a leadership role and for leading those teams on that Saturday morning, and thank each and every one of you for being here and working. And we also had 3 non-Kiwanians who rolled up their sleeves and worked with us, and that is Sandra's husband, Mike, Cricket's husband, Glenn, and Roger. So thank you very much. Okay, Jacqueline, do you want to come this way? I'm going to make one announcement, but come, and then I'll step away from the microphone. Partners Read is happening at Poe Elementary. If you want to participate, 8:30 in the morning until 9:05. Please contact Bob Goodell or Clay Taylor. Clay, will you just raise your hand? And it's on Fridays. If I said the wrong date, it's on Fridays. Jacqueline?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Kiwanis Club, for having me back again. I am still thinking about those delicious calories. It was the best calories I could have ever consumed at the pancake breakfast, so I do not feel guilty about it. I'm wearing my running shoes today. We'll talk about that later. But I am here to share some pretty amazing news let me just back up a minute and introduce myself a little bit more. I'm the executive director and co-founder of the Derek Wittenberg Foundation for Education. We do something really simple but yet necessary, and that is to help college students, juniors and seniors mainly, pay their tuition so that they can graduate without carrying a ton of student loan debt. And we've been in existence for 8 years, and already with community support, we've awarded close to $1 million. No federal funding, none of that, because it limits who we can help. I'm here to share, I love sharing that because I was one of those students. I walked in those shoes, so I know the struggle is real. So having said that, I wanted to let the Kiwanis Club know that I'm also impressed with the work that you do for our young people. And I'm constantly spinning my wheels trying to find ways to use my existing platform to continue that. And so that is about to happen on November 14th. The Derek Wittenberg Foundation is teamed up with the Summit Hospitality Group. And our focus is to try to address the issue in the hospitality industry. So we're opening a forum up for an afternoon summit at the AC Hotel downtown Glenwood South rooftop for college students and high school students so that they will be able to come in and get some very informative information about options and opportunities in the hospitality industry if they're interested in that field. And there may be students who are studying other things. Business students are also invited to this. So if you know someone who has a high school student or a college student, we're going to talk about internships, and for college students, paid internships because they need money. So we're also going to be doing that and talking about some other platforms that are being created specifically for college and high school students. So I am going to send a link to Stacy with that information so that everyone will be able to see the details about the event. And the RSVP date is November 7th, but we'll extend it if we need to. But I thank you for allowing me to come and share that. And God bless all of you and have a wonderful, wonderful Friday.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So if any SLP advisor here today has a college student or a high school student at their school in their clubs that would like to attend, please email me and we'll make sure you get the link from Jacqueline. Thank you. The Miracle League of the Triangle has been postponed to the spring. So more to come on that, and we'll keep everyone in the loop. And a reminder that in November, the fourth Friday, we'll be serving dinner at the Salvation Army on Friday. Please contact Cricket Herald if you would like to be involved in that. Bell ringing is scheduled for December 3rd. The first 2 slots have already been filled, so we have 2 more slots. If you want to ring a bell for Kiwanis at the for the Salvation Army, please contact Cricket Herald. And Buck, can we do membership welfare?
Great. Hope everybody's fine today. I only have one membership welfare item, and that's Mac Jenkins is undergoing knee surgery as we speak. Does anybody, and please remember Mac in your thoughts and in your prayers. Does anybody have any other membership welfare items? Also, be sure to look on the board, and it's up there from time to time, whose birthday it's going to be this week and the coming week. Thank you so much.
As chair of the nominating committee, I wanted to announce today that Meredith Little, Meredith, could you stand up? Has accepted our committee nomination to fill the board seat vacated by Ashley Dunstan. We'll be voting on that in 2 weeks. So we'll have the vote in 2 weeks. Thank you very much, Meredith.
Thank you, and we look forward to having our speaker here in just a second. Let me say one thing. Mrs. Whittenberg was here. She is Derek Whittenberg's wife, who's the man who made the pass across the court that led Jim Valvano's team to victory at the national level. So let's give her another hand. And I've also got Derek Whittenberg coming as a speaker later in the year. So we'll give you 2 hits at the bat then, okay? Our speaker today is Ben Rappaport. He is the education reporter, and he covers not only the school system, but local politics and news in Chatham County for the News and Record. He's a Raleigh transplant who moved here from Southern California. We're glad he's here. He graduated from UNC in Chapel Hill. He has a degree in journalism, and he served as the assistant opinion editor of the Daily Tar Heel. He previously worked at a radio station in Chapel Hill, and he worked for the Bush Radio Group in Cape Town, South Africa. Today he's going to speak to us about a multi-billion-dollar project coming to the Triangle, VinFast. The Vietnamese electric vehicle company has promised to invest more than $4 billion and 7,500 jobs over the next 10 years in this area. Ben will share what he learned while recently touring their facility in Vietnam and touring the country in Vietnam, and he will tell us what to expect when VinFast comes to North Carolina. Please welcome Ben Rappaport.
Wow, awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is really, really exciting. I'm so glad that Buck and Mr. Broughton reached out to me, and it's super exciting to be here. Like Buck mentioned, I'm a UNC graduate not so long ago in December of 21 from the Hussman School of Journalism and Media. I worked at the Daily Tar Heel, the radio station over there in Chapel Hill, WCHL, and most recently, prior to working at the Chatham News Record, I had a brief stint in Cape Town where I was interning at a radio station. But now I'm in Chatham County, writing about technically education, but I'm talking about VinFast today. And I was at a politics meeting last night, so I do a little bit of everything. It's a small newsroom over there. We don't really have beat reporters. But anyway, just before I dive in too much, can I just get a general showing of who has heard of VinFast or knows anything about it, just to kind of know the background here? Okay, awesome, great. That's awesome. Well, anyway, I'm going to be talking today about VinFast. Like Buck mentioned, I was there for about 6 days in Vietnam touring their facilities. They invited us out there. They rolled out the red carpet for us. It was stunning and amazing, but also left me with a lot of questions about what VinFast is going to bring to the Triangle and to Chatham County especially, where they're going to be building a massive, massive manufacturing facility. So let's get into it. This is my presentation about VinFast and how they're planning to shake up North Carolina and potentially the nation. And I'm Ben, a reporter at the Chatham News Record. So what is VinFast and what the heck is it doing in Chatham County, North Carolina? Chatham County is part of this new corridor that is popping up in I would say the Piedmont region of North Carolina, in what's going to be the future Interstate 685. So that's basically the areas right outside of Raleigh and Durham and Chapel Hill, where there's going to be a ton of manufacturing, namely in Chatham County. You may have also heard about the Wolfspeed development that was announced a few weeks ago in Chatham County, as well as Boom, FedEx. There's a whole corridor that's popping up of manufacturing facilities in this area along this new interstate that's going to happen. And it's all going to be manufacturing with a lot of jobs, a lot of economic investment to really help, North Carolina, and especially this region of North Carolina, be an epicenter of new energy and new industry. So what is VinFast? As we mentioned, it's a Vietnamese electric car manufacturer, and they're owned by Vingroup, which is a Vietnamese conglomerate. I would think of Vingroup similar, but not quite as powerful as an Amazon, where they kind of have a bunch of different entities that they have their fingers in. So there's Vin Homes, Vin University, Vin Malls. They have all this other stuff, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And they're coming to a very small town in Moncure, North Carolina, which is in Chatham, in the southernmost. If you can kind of picture the outline of Chatham County, it's in that southern little tip over there in the eastern half of the county. So it's a very small part, but they're going to be building a huge facility, nearly 2,000 acres, which is massive. And they chose North Carolina after visiting all 50 states. There's more than, off the top of my head, I think it's about 500 different sites that they looked at prior to choosing Chatham County. And so you may be saying, why the heck would they choose Chatham County of all places? Which is a good question. And the answer lies a lot in the money. Surprise. So North Carolina gave them massive tax incentives, which we'll get into later. And that is one of the main reasons that they're coming to North Carolina. They were looking, of course, also at Savannah, Georgia, and a little tidbit that the people in Chatham County don't love to talk about is that VinFast actually wanted to be in Savannah, Georgia first, but Kia outbid them. So they're now coming to Chatham County, which is a win for us in some ways. And the name of the game, before I move on, the name of the game for Vingroup and VinFast in Vietnam is speed. They put the fast in VinFast for sure. Everything they do is built and constructed at lightning speed. And one of the big questions that I have about how this is going to play out when they do inevitably begin their work in Chatham is, will they be able to keep up that speed given the regulations and the different contexts of the US and Vietnam? So that's one of the things I want people to keep in mind as we continue talking about what VinFast is and what their plans are. So just a little quick breakdown by the numbers. Buck mentioned a couple of these big numbers, but they're planning to invest over the next 30 years, $4 billion in economic investment, which is huge. It was the largest for about 6 months until Wolfspeed announced that they were also coming with $5 billion. So they're going to be investing $4 billion, and they're coming thanks to $1.2 billion in incentive packages that includes state, local, federal funding across the board. And over those 30 years, they're going to be creating, or hopefully they'll be creating 7,500 jobs for North Carolina. And a lot of those incentives that I just mentioned are based on job performance. The average wage of those manufacturing jobs in the facility is going to be $51,000, which is a pretty standard wage, but it's currently above the median income in Chatham County, which I think we can expect to increase as we see Wolfspeed move in and VinFast as well. And as I mentioned, it's almost 2,000 acres of land, 1,765 acres at what is known as Triangle Innovation Point, which is basically just a massive plot of land in Moncure that they've been prepping for a mega site in a big industry like VinFast to come along for many years. And as we see here, over the next 30 years, it's projected that VinFast may grow the state's economy by $71.6 billion, which of course is huge. I'm going to be throwing a lot of numbers out, by the way, and if you can't wrap your head around them, that's okay. Hopefully we can send out this presentation afterwards. There's a couple of links I have to stories that we've written about Vietnam, or VinFast and my time in Vietnam, that you all can read at your own leisure. And I also just want to re-emphasize the point that Moncure is not a big area, but they're getting a big boom from VinFast. The current population is 709, not 1,000, not like million, 709 people. So it's a very small town in Chatham County. It's a very spread out area, and it's about to change big time over the next few years, which is also something we'll talk about, how those small town residents are expected to interact with VinFast as they come into town. So before we get into what's happening in North Carolina, I want to take you overseas to Vietnam. As I mentioned, I was there for about 6 days on a tour organized and paid for by VinFast, excuse me. And they took us everywhere. They took us into their manufacturing facilities. They took us on fancy dinner boat cruises. They took us to see shows, and they took us on tourist traps and all of these different things. But the main reason that they did all that was to show off what they've been up to in Vietnam, and also to pay for good press, which, you know, maybe they got and maybe they didn't. I don't know. But anyway, so they rolled out the red carpet for us, and they took us to all these places. And along with the manufacturing facilities, they also told us about these other operations that they're involved in Vin Homes, Vin Resorts, Vin Park, which is an amusement park that was very strange, Vin Mall, and there's basically Vin everything in Vietnam. And they have their footprint on everything as well. It's a huge conglomerate. And as I mentioned, they are a big entity in Vietnam. I think I have in a slide later in this presentation that they make up more than 2% of the country's GDP. So that's a massive figure, and they are doing a lot of work. The big question, of course, though, is Vietnam is not the same as America in terms of market, in terms of politics, in terms of any sort of system. So how it's going to transfer over, I think, remains to be seen. One of the big things I did want to emphasize before we move on is just how big of an operation it is. They have 6,000 employees at their manufacturing facility alone, and that doesn't even include all the other entities that they showed us around towards. They, had tons of people accommodating us everywhere we went, and I think that was an encouraging sign when you think about, will they be able to deliver on that 7,500 job promise? And the theme of that trip was seeing is believing. But one of the things that I walked away with personally was more questions than answers. Maybe that's because I didn't come in with enough questions, but also it may be because I saw so much of what Vin Group is there and wondered about what it may be when it comes here. So to look under the hood a little bit, VinFast, I know I mentioned I have a little bit of skepticism. That's a personal feeling, a personal opinion, and I'll acknowledge it. But to their credit, they've been plucking people from the industry, the car industry's best people, from BMW to Renault to GM, etc. The employees that we met that are working for VinFast, the car company, are from these top car brands, and they know what they're doing, and they believe in the company and its ability to succeed. I think there was a headline in Time magazine about VinFast that said they wanted to be the next Tesla. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I actually buy into the fact that they're the same in terms of structure, but in the idea that they want to be the next big EV manufacturer in the United States, I think that's definitely the case. And looking at their manufacturing facility in Vietnam, which they told us at least is supposed to be fairly similar to what we're going to see in Moncure. It's 80% automated, which you may say, how are they going to employ so many people when it's 80% automated? But the fact is that even with all that automation, and we did see it was a lot, from the printing shops to the paint facilities to whatever, they gave us a really inside look at what the facilities are. And with that 80% automation, they still had 6,000 employees at their facility, which was smaller. The facility in Vietnam is about 800 some odd acres in Hai Phong, Vietnam. And of course, as I mentioned, the one in Chatham County is going to be about 1,700 acres. So the one in Chatham County is going to be 90% automated, but they're still, of course, promising 7,500 jobs. And I think that that's a conceivable number given 80% automation, 6,000 jobs on a smaller plant. The big difference there in the acreage, though, is the battery facility. In Vietnam, they produce their batteries at a different site than where they build the cars. And in Chatham County, it's all going to be in one place. And they're also going to have some employee development and training and other facilities on site that they don't have in Vietnam, but they will in Chatham County. So I also, as I mentioned, Vin Group has their name and everything. I just wanted to touch briefly on what exactly that looks like. So they're building more than just cars in Vietnam. It's really like a whole lifestyle brand. You think about something like Apple, right? Where you have an iPhone and an Apple Watch and a MacBook and a whatever. They're trying to do a similar type of thing, not with devices, but with lifestyle in terms of you live in a Vin home, you drive a VinFast car, and all of these sorts of different things. Maybe you attend Vin University. But it's really, when you think about it, it's really something for the elite of Vietnam. Vietnam is, of course, a communist country. They have some capitalist structures, of course, and it's kind of different. But in terms of there's very different class systems in Vietnam than there are here. And so when you talk about the elite of Vietnam being able to buy into this Vin lifestyle, it's a very small subset of people with very deep pockets. As I mentioned before, Vin Group is the country's largest conglomerate. They have a total market value of $24.4 billion. And as I mentioned also, they have a GDP of 2.2% in 2020. And it's really hard to go anywhere without seeing something of Vin Groups, whether it be a university or a Vin home or a mall, which is probably their most prevalent feature, I guess, in Vietnam. But I want to say, too, with this caveat, like Vin Group is in Vietnam, but Vin Group is not coming to Chatham County. Only VinFast is. And so I think that's another big question, is can VinFast, without the backing, I mean, it'll have the backing of Vin Group, but without all these other entities with it, will it be able to succeed in North Carolina under just cars? So that brings us to this question. Can cars alone succeed? One thing about the US car industry is it's very, very different than the market of the car industry in Europe, in Asia, anywhere else. The US has a very distinct car market in that the infrastructure here, for better or for worse, is very car dependent. And so that also means that when everyone here, or most folks, have a car, have access to one, and that also means that when we buy a car, we're very brand dependent. So, if you have a Toyota and you like your Toyota, chances are you're going to keep coming back to Toyota. And so for a new car company to break into the market, it's a really challenging thing to do. we all know that Tesla hasn't always been as prevalent as it is now. They've gone through a lot of ups and downs in terms of how Americans perceive the company and whether or not we're going to buy into that company. So I think it may take a while before we see VinFast, up and down the streets of 540 here, or whatever it may be. And just to go into the prices a little bit, they are marketing the EVs as kind of the EV for the everyman. It's comparable to the EVs that we're seeing from Kia and Chevy and Ford and all these other companies that you're already aware of that are producing EV models. So the VF8, which is going to be like their 5-seater crossover SUV situation, is $41,000. It has a mile range of 260 miles. Their VF9, which is a bigger SUV, it's a 3-row, 7-seater. That one's going to go for $56,000 and have a 350-mile range. But there's a quick caveat with those price points, which is that they have this interesting business model of a battery subscription. So this is the sticker price of $41,000 or $56,000. But it's not really the price you're paying, because you also, in order to have a battery, which, breaking news, is needed to have a working vehicle, you also need to include this battery subscription plan, which is kind of like a warranty for the car. And I don't know the total details off the top of my head, and forgive me, I'm very much not a car person at all. But basically, it relies on the company being able to produce more batteries than the average EV company, which should be interesting to see if they're going to be able to do, given that they're promising their customers that, if your battery runs out, we're going to replace it because you paid for the subscription. But just to give you kind of a reference, $41,000 is very similar to the EVs that Chevy is selling right now, which are going for about $43,000. And so it's an interesting question, right? Like, why is someone going to pick the slightly cheaper car in a brand that they don't necessarily know? I think there are a lot of questions for VinFast still to answer. And when we were driving the cars, I mentioned I'm not a car person, but I was there with a lot of people who are like car experts or car journalists, who basically just test drive cars for a living and write about them for a living. And so one of the quotes that someone told me, this guy's an editor for Car and Driver magazine, and he said, it's going to be really tough to sell to the American market. It needs to stand out from the pack, and it has the potential to, but at least in pre-production, which is what we drove, it's not there yet. And so I think there is a long way to go for VinFast in terms of production of their vehicles. But I don't necessarily think that means they're going to fail or they're going to succeed. I just think there's a big question mark at the moment. And there's also possible reasons, there's also some possible reasons for skepticism, namely the stock market and their stock prices, which of course affect business. They haven't IPO'd yet, meaning they haven't gone public in terms of their ownership. And in speaking to VinFast in Viet Nam, they told us they're not exactly in a rush and they want to wait until the market is right to do so. But we are seeing falling stock prices. At the moment, they're only trading for about $3 a share, and they've also had drops in revenues year over year of about 20%. So, those prices, those stock prices that we see, I think Triangle Business Journal was the one who reported these numbers, and they said that, if we saw these stock prices in the US, it's unlikely that we would be giving them $1.2 billion in incentives and massive plots of land. But again, it's one of these things about different contexts of the company and being able to transfer over. So, as I mentioned at the very beginning, they're VinFast, but are they US fast? It'll be very curious to see how all of that plays out. And as I mentioned, they have very, very deep pockets. They're the biggest conglomerate in Vietnam, a huge entity, and they're looking to expand into a global market. They've opened showrooms in California. They're looking to open in Europe and across Asia. They want to be a big player. But because they have big pockets, that also means in some ways, not totally, but in some ways, they can afford to fail in North Carolina, which I think means that, we as a public, as journalists, as, politicians, whoever it may be, I think we have an onus to keep them accountable and ensure that, they are doing what they promised as they come into North Carolina. And with that means empowering the current residents that do live in Moncure. As I mentioned, it's a small town, but that doesn't mean there are 0 people there. There are people there whose homes are being affected, whose lives are being impacted. And based on the roadway plans to the future VinFast site, there's going to be 27 homes, 5 businesses, and 1 historic church displaced as a result of roadways that are going into the VinFast facility. That's under current NCDOT plans. Those aren't finalized by any stretch, but they have had a public hearing. People have given their input on this. So all of, we have to keep in mind, as we grow, we have to keep in mind the needs of the current residents too. I think that's a problem we're seeing here in Raleigh at the moment, and it's definitely a huge, huge problem that we're seeing in Chatham County, with some parts of the county being much poorer than others. How do we keep the needs of the current residents in mind as we have this expansion and potential displacement of residents? So I want to open it up now to questions. Thank you guys so much for having me. This was really, really great, and happy to take any and all questions. Always tough to be the first one.
What's going to be the sales model for how these are going to be distributed? You know, in North Carolina, we had Tesla come in and we wouldn't allow them to have showrooms, and we had to buy off the internet, which is what we did. What's going to be the way they're going to be sold in North Carolina?
That's an interesting question I don't actually know the answer to. I think their plan is to they've said that they're going to have cars off the manufacturing line in North Carolina by the end of 24. I don't know how realistic that timeline is, again, given some of the bureaucracy, but I think the idea is that they're going to build in North Carolina, and then they already have showrooms in California. I'm not exactly sure. I don't totally know the answer to your question, to be completely fair.
Vietnam is a communist country.
Yes.
So what does it mean to be a conglomerate in Vietnam?
Yeah, so I just meant that they, have different sort of entities that they have their fingers in.
So who owns them? I guess
They're owned by the richest man in Vietnam, and whose name I am totally blanking on, but he's one of the richest men in the world.
One person.
Yes, one person and his family, basically.
Yeah, my question was about, you said they're going to produce batteries on site.
Mm-hmm.
So have there been environmental studies to look at the impact that's going to have on the environment? And a follow-up question. So do we have any model of, a company that basically that is in a communist country producing cars to sell in, capitalistic?
Yeah. Well, so to answer your second question first, I don't think we do. And VinFast has praised themselves as being the first ones to kind of do that, to try and break in to the American car market, given the context of Vietnam. And really, they're one of the first Vietnamese companies to really try and break into the American market in any sort of sector. So no, I don't think we have a model for that, and we especially don't have a model for it in the car industry. I think VinFast is attempting to be the first to do that. And to go back to your first question, that has been one of my big questions as well, and we've asked our readers to send in questions that they have. That's been something they're very concerned about. But VinFast, they want to say we're building electric vehicles, so it's good for the environment, which we know is not necessarily the case. But I think that's something that they've been saying, and it's been pretty unclear what exactly the environmental impact is going to be. I will say that in Chatham County, we have a long-standing, and people on both sides of the aisle are more than willing to admit that we have major infrastructure issues in terms of wastewater and sewer and pollution into the Haw River and all of these sorts of things. Those are long-standing issues in North Carolina, and especially in Chatham County. And I think that that's going to be something to keep an eye on, is how do we make sure that these companies are able to do what they've promised they're going to do, while also preserving the environment and giving them the necessary infrastructure they need to achieve all that they have promised.
It smells like to me that they're going to build these cars in North Carolina and ship them to California. I mean, you just said they already got places in California. I mean, I bet you that they're not going to sell any in North Carolina. They're going to all put it into California, which has gone totally EV. And because you got to have a service system, you got to fix them too. They're not unfixable.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think, I honestly don't know. I think that's not a horrible prediction. In full transparency, obviously it's not great, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have another.
Sure.
It's a serious question.
Yeah.
And I'm of the age where Vietnam was important. Grew up in the 60s. 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam. Probably was a disaster. Shouldn't have been there at all.
Right.
So my question, and I got this from Frank Manson. It's not my question. Are they going to have Jane Fonda be their spokesman here?
Listen, we appreciate the questions. When you finish that, we've got to go. We've got a memorial resolution coming. Did you finish answering that question?
Well, I do want to just make a quick point, because I think that's something that has come up a lot about, Vietnam. U.S. has a long history with Vietnam in terms of the war. There are people of, several generations that have trauma from being in Vietnam, and how will a Vietnamese company be accepted or not accepted?
I want to know why we are now bringing cars from communist countries that's going to reduce the number of cars that are made in this country by a considerable amount, probably.
Well, just to clarify on that, they're building a manufacturing facility, so they're going to be building in North Carolina. That much we know for sure. But to answer your question, prior to them deciding on North Carolina and deciding on the U.S. in general, they did a number of different civic polls of citizens that were third-party entities that did these polls, and they found that Americans largely, of younger generations especially, which they're kind of targeting as the EV market, they found that those people don't necessarily have as much negative feeling towards the people and the companies of Vietnam as they did many years ago, because many people view, as the gentleman back there mentioned, quite a few people view going to Vietnam as a war that maybe shouldn't have been fought. And so I think for that reason, there's not a negative view of the Vietnamese people and their companies, which is why I think they felt okay to build their manufacturing facility in the US. That's all skepticism. I don't know for sure what all went on behind the scenes, but I think it's an important point. Yeah. This company is not from the government. Like they made a, I'm laughing because I asked someone, like, what sort of state backing do you guys have here in Vietnam? And they got very angry with me that they are indeed very independent from the Vietnamese government itself. So it's a company, and it is not backed by the state, aside from, incentives and things.
Ben, we thank you for being with us today, sir. We have to cut this short. We've got a memorial resolution. Let's give a round of applause to Ben Rappaport. Ben, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben, for sharing. Would you be willing to stay after the meeting if folks have a few additional questions?
Yes, definitely. And there are copies of, just a quick plug, there are copies of the paper. This week's paper is not one about VinFast, unfortunately. There are copies of this week's paper throughout the desk and over there. And I'll pass on my card, and if you ever have questions or story ideas for Chatham County, feel free to let me know, and I'll be around after.
And we support a reading program with elementary. Can I get you to sign the book? There's a label in there. If you'll sign your name on that label, and I'll put that up afterwards. Thank you, Ben. Let's hear it for Ben. Before we read our resolution, I want to thank our guests for coming today. Thank you, Lucy, Jonathan, David, Jacqueline, Helen, Bob, Brian, Megan, Andrew, Barbara, Harrison, Avery, and online, Susie, Pete, Kathy, Christopher, and Clyde Jr. Our next meeting will be Lynn Mingies from the North Carolina Restaurant Association. And now for our memorial resolution. Whereas Clyde Harrison McDowell, son of George Harrison McDowell and Rosa Tucker McDowell, was born on September 7th, 1920 in Albemarle, North Carolina, and died on December 3rd, 2020, at the age 100 in Cary, North Carolina. And whereas Clyde Harrison McDowell earned a degree from a business college in High Point, North Carolina, and began his career at Sears, Roebuck and Company, he married Frances Keith on Christmas Day, 1940, and they had 46 years, wonderful years together. Whereas Clyde Harrison McDowell served honorably in the U.S. Navy for 3.5 years during World War II. After the war, he continued working at Sears and earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from Duke University. Clyde and his family moved to Raleigh in 1950, and he worked at Sears until his retirement in 1983 as one of the company's longest-serving employees. And whereas Clyde Harrison McDowell was a man of strong faith, a longtime active member and volunteer at Eatonton Street United Methodist Church. He was a lifetime member of the Iron Dukes, and he and Frances enjoyed attending many Duke University sporting events. He was also active in the Coast Guard Auxiliary and enjoyed community service. And whereas Clyde Harrison McDowell loved summer vacations at the beach with his family and teaching his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren how to fish, love life, and be responsible citizens. He was known for his great sense of humor and a sly grin, which was especially noticeable when he was about to stump you at a card game or amaze you with his knowledge of trivia. And whereas Clyde Harrison McDowell was predeceased by his wife Frances in 1986, he was survived by his children, Helen Ross and her husband Bob of Charleston, South Carolina, Clyde McDowell Jr. of Houston, Texas, and David McDowell and his wife Barbara of Raleigh, 4 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. David, who was well known and appreciated by Kiwanians for kindly bringing his father to meetings in later years, subsequently died in 2021. And whereas Clyde Harrison McDowell was an active, dependable, and valued Kiwanian member for many years, he earned a George F. Hickson Fellowship Award. He joined the Golden K Kiwanis Club of Raleigh in 1986, serving as its president the year of its peak membership of 132. He joined the Kiwanis Club of Raleigh, North Carolina in 2012. And whereas Clyde Harrison McDowell was a loving family man who opened his heart and offered sound advice and counsel to his friends, to his family, and to the members of the Kiwanis Club of Raleigh, North Carolina, who recognize him as a suitable role model for any citizen who seeks to make a positive impression among his family and to leave his community a better place than he found it. And whereas the Kiwanis Club of Raleigh, North Carolina, desires to recognize, honor, and emulate the life of Clyde Harrison McDowell and the quality of the relationships he built. Therefore, be it resolved that the Kiwanis Club of Raleigh, North Carolina, here memorializes the life of a loyal member, Clyde Harrison McDowell, celebrates his career, and commends to all a life well lived and a demonstrated dedication to his family, to his friends, to his church, and to his community. And be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be spread among the minutes of the Kiwanis Club of Raleigh, North Carolina, and be it finally resolved that a copy of this resolution be provided to his daughter Helen to be shared by her with other members of the family as an expression of the affection and respect of the Kiwanis Club of Raleigh, North Carolina, for its member, Clyde Harrison McDowell, adopted unanimously by its membership on this day, the 28th of October. We will close with a moment of silence in honor of Clyde Harrison McDowell.